Hello, welcome to a new Whimsy Stamps video. I am going to be sharing how I created a Sorry Sympathy card using some ATC products in ways that they were not originally intended to be used. So just trying to really stretch my supplies. So I have one of the frames from the ATC Signature Frames stamp set, and I'm stamping it in some brown ink onto some white cardstock. And I'm going to use what is intended to be a background for an ATC card as a background on a framed image on my Sympathy card. Since I stamped it in a VersaFine Clair ink, I'm going to emboss it with my clear embossing powder just to give it some texture and really help that color stand out, because I'm going to be using some Oxide inks and distressing over that background. I'm going to be using tea dye to create kind of a light colored, I want it to look like distressed old paper, if that makes sense. So I thought tea dye is perfect since people used to dye their paper with tea. And I just went for an uneven distress background. And then I used a towel to wipe off any ink over the embossed image. I used my water sprayer to create some texture and went ahead and dabbed that up using that same cloth. Now I'm using one of my new frame dies that are also intended for ATC size cards to die cut that out. And in order to create a darker edge to blend in with that background stamp, I'm just bringing in my vintage photo and a foam dauber to add ink all around the edge of my die cut image. And once that's done, I can set that aside and we'll move on to the next part of the card. I have my tulip vase from my 10 Games stamp set, and this image is actually supposed to be as if the tulip vase fell over, and that's what goes with the sorry sentiment, like it is a spilt vase and there's water coming out of it. But I wanted to try and use this stamp set as if the tulips were still inside of my vase. So I could alter the stamp, but because I don't want to damage my stamp, I'm creating a mask so that way I can block out my stamped image on the actual stamp when I apply ink and stamp onto my paper, basically hiding any evidence inside the vase that the vase is tipped over. And of course, my camera did not record the stamping part, but it's just a form of masking to make sure I don't get ink in the part of the bottom of the vase. So it looks like my tulips are still floating inside once I add water and not on its side where the tulips are falling out. I hope that made sense. I'm using my Zig Clean Color brushes to add some color. I use green for the stems, kind of a pink red for the tulips themselves, and then I use blue for the water inside of the vase, which there is no line where the water is, again, because I blocked the one where it showed it looked like it was spilling over. So I'm just adding my own water just by coloring the vase in blue. I'm not going to color any of that water on the side of my tulips because I'm going to cut out my image. I'm going to fussy cut right up against that embossed line because I stamped it in that same VersaFine brown ink and used my clear embossing powder to create a nice line to match my background. And I also used a knife to cut in between my two flowers so it was a very consistent cut around my vase. I've grabbed a few different printed papers for my stash. I thought about using a floral paper background, but I thought it would be too busy, so I went with this Bokeh paper, which coincidentally matched the colors of my vase and my tulips, so I thought I should obviously use this one since it will be very matchy-matchy. And I'm trimming down my paper to be 1/4 of an inch smaller than an A2 size card. So my background paper will be 4 by 5 1/4, and that way I'll have a nice border showing on my card base behind my printed paper. Now this is another ATC die set. I thought these framed die cuts were so pretty and intricate and I wanted to incorporate them onto my card. So I die cut them out of some rose gold shimmery paper cardstock, and I thought before I get too far I better stamp my sentiment. So I'm grabbing that large sorry stamp and I'm just using my Misty to help me stamp that onto my pattern paper, using my flower and background frame to make sure my sorry is centered onto my background. I went ahead and stamped that in the same brown ink, but I am not going to emboss this stamped image. Now I can start assembling some of my pieces together. So I'm going to adhere my brown background along with these rose gold pieces. I decided to only use 2 and create kind of a tabletop on my background for my glass of, or my vase of tulips to sit on. So that way it just creates a nice little scene on that background and just gives the image some grounding, like the vase is sitting on a table rather than floating on the background. So I'm gluing one down to the bottom left and the other to the bottom right, and it creates this really pretty intricate design behind that flower vase. I'm going to pop up my flower vase, so I'm going to use some foam squares and adhere that down to my framed background. And then I will go ahead and glue this directly to my card base or to my background paper using some wet glue. I'm going to use my grid mat here just to help make sure I've centered my image as much as possible to my pattern paper. And for the next item that I'm going to use, as it was not necessarily originally intended, is my creepy Sparkletz blend here. They have spiders and pumpkins and orange sequins, but there are also these beautiful rhinestones in there. So I'm just going to put those rhinestones around my card and use a jewel picker and some wet glue to adhere those down. Now to finish assembling my card, I use that same rose gold metallic paper and cut out a frame to glue behind my printed paper. I do not want to waste any type of pretty paper like this, so I have only cut a frame that will show behind my patterned paper, and I'm not going to include any of that precious metallic paper where it won't be seen. I'm using some foam adhesive to apply to the center of my frame, and then I'm gluing down that pattern paper so that way it is centered to the card base. So now there is this really pretty kind of peak of rose gold shimmer behind my pattern paper to tie in with that intricate design in the center of my card. Here is a final look at my card. You can use the links in my description to see what products were used to create it. I also hope you'll like this video if you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you're new here to the Whimsy Stamps, please subscribe and make sure you head over to our social media using the links below. Bye!